Hi, I'm Dr. Drew Bogner, President of Molloy College, and I'd like to welcome you to the Public Square 2.0. For several years, we had a regular show on Telecare called The Public Square. Throughout history, the Public Square has been an important meeting place for townspeople to debate the key issues of the day. In our first Public Square TV show, we met with a variety of Long Islanders to discuss things like taxes, housing, discrimination, and a wide variety of other issues so important to the future of Long Island. With the Public Square 2.0, we're going in a slightly different direction. In this new program, we will be bringing you some of the great faculty that currently teach at Molloy College. They will share their insights on subjects that we hope you will find both entertaining and enlightening. Today's speaker is Valerie Griggs. Valerie is a poet, singer-songwriter, spiritual director, and teacher. She's a full-time consultant to the Molloy Writing Center and also teaches in the English department. Today she will be speaking to us about imagination. Most people know that their children have a great imagination, but what most people don't realize is that the imagination is just as important to adults. Please join me in welcoming Valerie Griggs.
Thank you, Dr. Bogner. It's just your imagination. You're imagining things. How many times have we said or heard that? And what's the sentiment behind that saying? It's just your imagination. It seems to imply that the imagination is something that can't be trusted, something that's unreliable, something we shouldn't take seriously. On the other hand, when it comes to toddlers and children, we do take imagination seriously. We spend a lot of money developing edutainment toys, right? Educational toys. We invest a lot of time in studies and research to find that program, that curriculum, to monitor and measure and enhance cognitive development. We test the correlations between creativity, unstructured play, motor skills, and you know what the experts say? What we're really talking about is imagination. We're so conflicted about imagination that we don't even want to use the word, we want to dress it up with objective clinical terms, cognitive development. For childhood and toddlers, imagination is wonderful. And we guard that time. We want them to nurture their imagination, feed the imagination. But then I think something happens. At a certain point, for some reason, I think as a culture, we pull back from imagination, that faculty of imagination. And so today I want to explore with you, why does this happen? Why is imagination, or the imaginal realm, okay for children, but at a certain point, it doesn't seem to be as acceptable. There's like a sell-by date on imagination, maybe 12, 14 years old. And I think this is a problem because I don't know if we're aware that we go from this wonderful, idyllic childhood, the world of the fanciful and the imaginative, to something known as the forsaken college student. And here they are, at a point in their lives where they need the faculty of imagination to synthesize ideas, to explore, to come up with fresh new ideas of their own. And basically, they've run all out of steam because at some point, it's just your imagination set in. Your imagining things set in. So I'd like to talk with you today about this conflict we have with imagination, that it seems to be okay at one point in life, but as life goes on, imagination's significance seems to drop out, and I think that's a mistake. And maybe we should be a little bit more aware of the fact, as Dr. Bogner said, imagination is something that we need all through life. So I'd like to start with a definition, right, of imagination. And it's a faculty that forms new ideas or images or concepts of external objects present to the sense that don't exist yet. They're not there yet, right? And we all all like this. We all value this. We want to see this in the business world. We want to see this in educators, fresh, innovative ideas, maybe even in politicians, right? We value, think outside the box. So there seems to be this one message, of this faculty, this skill that is valued. But there's also this underlying philosophy, let's say, about imagination that somehow, because it works differently, right? Imagination works differently than logic or reason. There might be this assumption that it's somehow inferior. It's an inferior mental process. And we might even think of it as childish or immature. Okay. So we have these mixed signals about imagination, which I think leads to that forsaken and beleaguered college student, but anybody, right? If you feel beleaguered or burnt out in your profession or parenting or at home, there's something in our mental faculty that is being undermined to help us live in our situations. We do know in our heart of hearts that imagination is really very important. And Einstein, of course, said imagination is more important than knowledge. Like we live in the information era. Knowledge at our fingertips, Google everything. Any fact, immediately at your fingertips. Well, Einstein wouldn't think that's so great, right? The imagination is more important. And then the romantic poet William Blake said, what is now proved was once only imagined. And the most obvious example is man's desire to fly, right? From Icarus's wax wings to Apollo 11. That's the history of imagination, right? Making something that wasn't there. Okay. I think we have this tug of war with imagination, this conflicted relationship with imagination, because what it takes to build up our imaginative muscles or to keep the imagination healthy and vivid takes a lot of work, and the kind of work that we're not really all thrilled about. The work is not our favorite pastimes. There are lots of reasons for what people might say the killing of the imagination or the death of the imagination. I'm just going to take a little lens to certain practices or attitudes that help the imagination stay strong and active all through life stages, but we don't really do it because we don't like the things that we have to do to keep imagination going. So I have like this image, right? When we think of imagination past, childhood or toddlers, when we think of imagination happening in 30s, 40s, 50s, we get a little skittish, the imaginary. The make-believe makes us a little skittish, and we try to stay away from it, distance ourselves from things like that, because, we have important practical things to do and take care of. And we have this attitude, I think, in part, because we don't want to do the things that the imagination needs. We don't want to feed the imagination with these three habits, let's call them: silence, solitude, and reflection. Some of us might not like these things at all, but we also don't have the time. And recently we were talking about there are so many gadgets at our fingertips at every waking moment where we can fill the silences. We don't have to be alone. We're always plugged into someone or something somewhere. But that doesn't really help the imagination mature or grow or to be strong. So silence we don't like because it appears to be inactive. It's like we're not really doing anything. And if we're inactive, we feel that maybe we're not as important or as significant. We might feel that we're losing some work because we're not busy. So I want to give you an image for silence, that actually silence, there's a lot going on when we are silent, when we are unplugged. There's a lot of interior energy going on beneath the surface, without the voices, the messages bombarding us. We can even maybe turn off some self-talk. and let our mind, our thoughts just kind of wander, not having to pay attention or being tuned to anything. And actually, there's a lot of energy happening there. So think of silence not as inactivity, but a lot of energy, interior energy. And then there's solitude. And we don't like solitude. We confuse it very often with loneliness, being isolated. But solitude also is a necessary work for the imagination, because after, far from the maddening crowd, the self asserts itself, or knows itself, or can show itself and be itself in solitude. Right? There's that adage, who you are when no one is around. And the imagination is the faculty, right, that really builds that healthy self-esteem, that genuine I, that separates me and connects me to what else is around me. But there's that I. Okay? That solitude fortifies. And then the last thing is reflection, and these three, they all go together, right? Silence, solitude, and reflection. And this, again, is a trait. This makes us very human, right? With the creatures who can look and think about ourselves. We get to look at what we do, why we do it, how we feel about it, how we can change it. We need to reflect. And reflection also leads to this ability to transform, to become what we really are on the inside, who we are. The circumstances around us, they change. We need imagination to live in them the way we want to be in them, the true people that we are. Okay? That's the solid piece. And if I'm reflecting on what's happening, how I feel, how I want to deal with it, what I want to be, how I want to do it, silence, solitude, and reflection will give my imagination, right, the place and the space that it needs to help me, right, transform, to transcend the circumstances. Okay? So this is, I'd like to replace our suspicion of the imagination with the idea that imagination is a process that we do at every stage of life. It's not just for one time at a particular condition in life, one stage, one time only. Imagination is a process. It's the energy that fuels our growth into every stage of life. Right? We ask the student to imagine what profession they're going to live and how they're going to be in that profession, what kind of professional they're going to be, how they'll live it. We also ask, ourselves, how do I imagine myself going from a wife to a mother? Or how do I imagine living with chronic illness? Imagining how I'm going to be now that my life is changed by some kind of loss or even some kind of gain. Right? Imagination gives me the power and the goal and the way to move into the unknown and to make something new. Right? To make the next stage or the stage of life that I'm in true to me, how I am, why I'm on this planet. Psychology, in this nice clinical terms, they say that to be whole and authentic, one needs a healthy process of exploration, expression, and autonomy. Very nice big concepts, which I think actually mean imagination. During childhood, which carries through all stages of life. And as life changes, we are imagining how to be in those stages and those changes. And the power to create something that isn't there is what I need, right? To face it, to rise above it, to even thrive in the challenges of life. And I like to leave with this thought from C.S. Lewis. This process of full circle, we're always maturing, we're always growing into who we truly are, our truest self. And C.S. Lewis gives us this comfort that someday you'll be old enough to read fairy tales again. So think about how imagination works in your life. If you're nurturing it, if you're honoring it, if you have forgotten about it too much, and maybe you need some imagination to help you face something, to rise above something, to make a change, to make a choice. And remember fairy tales. They are stories of transformation. They're stories of power. They're stories of identity, right, that invite us to form and create something that wasn't there, but which is supposed to be there. Thank you.
Welcome back to the Public Square 2.0. I'm Drew Bogner, president of Molloy College, and I'm here with Valerie Griggs, who just gave an absolutely fascinating talk on imagination, how important it is for those of us who are adults, and to continue to develop and nurture that. So I thought, as you're talking, I wanted to talk about your journey a moment.
Okay.
So have you always seen yourself as being imaginative?
Yes, I've always been, what I first called myself was a thinker. And, to ruminate and just kind of observe and think about things. And at a certain point, I was older. I was like maybe just around senior, junior in high school, where I wanted to be a writer, a poet. And that's when I thought, I am a thinker, but it's really more about imagination.
Yeah,
dreaming.
I find that's really interesting because I like to talk about this topic of creativity and imagination, because I do agree with you that it's something that we don't value as much. Well, some people don't value as much, and I'm going to talk more about that with you in just a moment. But I find that a lot of individuals don't particularly see themselves as imaginative or creative, though probably most people have that capacity. Everyone has that capacity, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You need imagination to tie your shoes, in a way.
Well, you're right, or to pick them out.
Yes,
You know.
yes.
Yeah, so I find that's really interesting, and so people who come to that perspective of nurturing their creativity and their imagination as adults have made some kind of quantum leap almost in our society, in a way. So I'm always interested how people do that, and it seems like most people went through a period of time when they maybe didn't see themselves that way, and then suddenly they decided that that was part of their definition of self. You know, and in that it speaks a little bit to how we view it in society. You were talking about that, so you were alluding to that somewhere along the way, in the way in which we structure life stages and education, we stop valuing that and emphasizing the value of that.
Yes. Yes, for some reason, it seems we want to get serious or get down to business and facts and, structure more than, I guess, the spontaneity or creativity. And I guess it's easier to manage classrooms with a structure than such a free flow, which is hard to manage.
And, I find that, too, today, with all the emphasis on testing, that it has to be more challenging than ever. I know I used to be the head of the teacher education program. It was my first administrative job, and so then there was more flexibility to talk about, well, how will you teach the content? And now there's still that flexibility, but that's a lot harder. And this idea that you have to make sure that they learn this skill and this, these concepts and those things. And so I worry about where that heads us on this journey.
Yes, I think it contributes, to the notion that so much structure or management of the way minds and hearts develop, that we do pull away from the things that really do develop the heart and mind, like unstructured or free time or downtime, being unplugged, and maybe just inventing play. Like play now is also very structured and rigid and filled with things. There's not really a lot of, some people make the case that children now don't have a lot of time to develop their imaginations because they're in front of screens, or they've got those edutainment toys, and everything is pretty much planned to produce, you know, a skill or something.
It's a structured play environment in that way. And I'm interested to see how those things will play out in terms of those kind of abilities and skills. But somehow a lot of people still rise above that and go through that, though. So that's really somewhat the conversation for the viewers, I think, is how we do that. So we can talk about the challenges we have, but yet there are individuals, many of them, who manage to reclaim that, or even if it's difficult to do that at times, or to reclaim it.
Right.
So perhaps we should talk about that little toolkit you were talking about. So you were really emphasizing the necessity to be able to pull back from what's happening in the world and to find some time to be able to reflect and meander and imagine and think and those kinds of things, right?
So we unplug, right? We unplug from the cell phone, the iPad. A lot of people also find it in jogging or hiking, you know, out in nature, leave the cell phone behind, just go out there. So people avail themselves to that. Their first intention might be, you know, for physical benefit. So you do have to also make a conscious choice that, and I will also, you know, daydream or let the mind go where it will while I'm hiking or working out or whatever. And a spiritual search too. Some people going for retreats, more and more. Artistic pursuits, you know, just being alone and drawing something or writing a poem.
You know, I work on those things. It's interesting. So I write poetry. I know you write poetry. And I never used to do that. I didn't really start writing poetry till I was probably 25, 26, something like that. So even in that, you know, for me, nature's really important. So I need to get out and get somewhere else. But I also find for me that it's really important that I have paper nearby. Because for me, you know, so I never know when that's going to happen. And so usually it's when I separate and my mind just has a way to escape, wherever that is. And it's usually in an unexpected time. But if I don't have the paper there, if I don't have, then I don't capture that and do that. Whatever that is. And it's not necessarily poetry, it could be ideas, concepts, you know. I find to be successful in my job, I have to have a lot of imagination. But I think I've taught myself that it's important when it comes to take the time to let it come out.
Yes, to stay with it, to honor it.
Yes, that's
give it a place.
That's it. That's exactly it. And I think too often we don't do that because we think, oh, no, I don't have time for that right now. I have to get this done. I have to go do that. I have to do this. And I have to get to work or whatever. And I find it's good if you can say, no, 10 minutes, little 10 minutes, let it come out.
Yes, yes, give it a chance. The world will turn, you know, things will go on. And I think that's the key, to make that choice. What's going to work for me? How do I keep it? How do I honor it? Everybody has to make that choice.
So when you think about as educators, how does that change the way we teach?
You know, needs to be spaces. I know from teaching I have an hour and 25 minutes to do X, and...
Yeah, you were really upset that you only had 12 minutes, you were telling me.
It was a hard number to work with.
And what did I say to you?
It doesn't
I said,
matter,
why is it 12?
5s or
Why isn't it 11? So you're used to an hour and a half.
Right, so you know, working with that, but also giving enough time where I'm not talking a lot. You know, how do I get it quiet in the classroom? Is it just to let them, it could be just taking the notes from the lecture, or giving, like when I ask students, okay, write a thesis, so let's try this, and really giving them enough time to actually do it, you know. And I find that try to make spaces. I have to really make spaces for them to, and they don't necessarily have to raise their hand and say anything.
No.
You know, but that to give them a space to do, you know, think about that or try that, write that down, see what happens. And try to incorporate that.
I think that's really important, and it's difficult if you view your job as covering information. You know, you have to get through as much information as possible. And then, you know, I'm always one of those people that realize that, you know, 90% of what you think you taught to the students is gone by the time, you know, within a month. So really, we're talking about making it real to them and connecting it to themselves. And so that's really somewhat the imagining how that concepts become real to you, right?
Yes. Now, I teach writing, so I think I cheat a little bit.
Well, you do because you're in a different skill
Yeah, right,
set of what you're teaching, a
Right.
different approach.
But it lends it, like you're saying, to have that paper, that whole thing of reflecting is what I try to, not just like, let's get, it does matter, the grammar right, but the reflection, let the thoughts come. You don't have to get it right the first time, just keep working at it. The process.
So, so any other suggestions you would make to people about how to attend to, like, you know, if you would say something to them like, you know, should you keep a journal? Should you, certain activities you should do? Should you carve out a certain amount of time, a day, a week?
It's hard because on the one hand, you need to structure it, but you don't want it to be structured. You want to be ready.
Well, I'm much more zen in my approach to it. When it comes, it comes.
And when it comes, it comes. But you're ready for it. You know, you've
I'm
got the paper and the notebook. What I would recommend, the most common thing that comes to us is dreaming, sleeping and dreaming and resting, and to pay attention to. Well, where do you go when you daydream? Or what are you dreaming about? Because a lot of the times, those kind of thoughts are like really close to our desires or our feelings. And it kind of gives us a way to, why am I daydreaming about that? Or why am I wishing for that? Or why am I dreaming about that? What is there for me? And you might recover something that you used to like to do, or want to do. And it could be anything. It could be cooking. It could be decorating. You know, anything that you like to do. That feeds the imagination, because then, you know, your mind is just open to the pleasure and the enjoyment of something, and that's unstructured in a way.
Right.
That's unstructured, and that opens things up.
Yeah, well, you have to find a way to feed the soul, really. You know, and I like the way you talk about becoming the kind of person you were meant to be, that you always were, and I think that's really imagination is that way. So maybe, you know, one of the last thoughts to leave with our viewers, which I'm listening to you, Valerie, is that, you know, it's something that's important to all of us as adults. We need to value that and make sure that we take care of that part of ourselves. I think we're all imaginative individuals, right?
Yes.
So we have to make sure to take care of that.
Yes, it's our nature.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for being with us, Valerie, on Public Square 2.0, and I want to thank our audience for joining us. And I hope you will be with us on future editions of Molloy's The Public Square 2.0. So thank you for joining us.